Hello and welcome to our Juneteenth event entitled A Juneteenth Conversation, Acknowledging Our History and Recasting Our Future, hosted by Moms Plain Air Force, Sierra Club, Georgia Chapter, and Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. I am your moderator, Dr. Tonya Calhoun, National Field Manager with Moms Plain Air Force. Juneteenth is the oldest nationally celebrated commemoration of the ending of slavery in the United States. To put this in perspective, President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, formally declaring the end of enslavement, was effective January 1st, 1863. And the enslaved people in the state of Texas, most of whom could not read or write, did not achieve emancipation until June 19th, 1865. Because of the magnitude of the length of the delay, as well as the unmitigated temerity of the denial of freedom to about 250,000 people, Juneteenth has come to symbolize for many a second U.S. Independence Day. As we engage in our conversation today about the relevance of Juneteenth to the Black community, the history of the destruction of the Greenwood community in Tulsa, Oklahoma 100 years ago, the inclusion of Brown and Black people in environmental policy-making decisions, and the Black maternal health crisis, we will address these topics from an environmental justice perspective and connect them to the lived experience of many in our communities. So for this very important conversation, we are joined by Almeta E. Cooper, Field Coordinator at Moms Plain Air Force, Heather McTeer Toney, Climate Justice Liaison at Environmental Defense Fund, Hermina Glass Hill, Coastal Engagement Associate at Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, and Kelly Presley, Full Spectrum Doula Trainer. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. I really appreciate you for joining us for this very important conversation. So I want to begin this conversation with Almeta Cooper, who will share with us a little more details about the past and present of Juneteenth. So Almeta, in this last year, many more Americans have become more familiar with Juneteenth because of the attention it has, it's been given as a result of heightened awareness at the local, national, and international levels of the pervasiveness of social and racial injustice. So for someone from Texas, what does Juneteenth mean to you?
Well, thank you, Tonya. I think the first thing that I would say is that my father's family is from East Texas, and my grandparents, Thomas C. Cooper and Almeta Cooper, my namesake, both lived in Hallsville, Texas, which is near Marshall, Texas, in Harrison County. They lived there all their lives. They lived there with their family. They were very fortunate to both be teachers and to own the farm that they lived on with their family. And my family is very close knit. So I spent every summer until I was 10 years old, I spent 2 weeks with my family, all my cousins from all over the country, and my grandparents. And I mention that because that informs how I understand and perceive Juneteenth and what my grandparents shared with my father, and then in turn, what my father shared with me. As you just mentioned, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation to be effective January 1, 1863, for all of the enslaved people in the southern United States, and that certainly included Texas. However, the word did not reach the people in Texas until June 19th of 1865. And at that time, there were about 3 million people who were affected. And as you mentioned, in Texas, about 250,000. And it's important also to emphasize is that not only could people not read and write, for the most part, they were prohibited from reading and writing. And that's significant because people often wonder, like, that's a 2.5-year gap. How was that information contained? But part of the reason is they were, for the most part, in rural settings and separated from others. So on June 19th of 1865, the federal troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, or as those of us from Texas might say, Galveston, Texas, and announced that of the emancipation. And even in 1865, that was still 2 months after Robert E. Lee had surrendered at Appomattox. So no matter how you look at the delay, it was a significant one. So from the perspective of an African-American family, and certainly in my family, probably one of the most significant parts or meanings about Juneteenth is really that delay, that gap between the time of the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation and when enslaved people were freed in Texas. Some people have suggested that that delay was because of the remoteness of Texas and the fact that most of the battles of the Civil War were not fought in Texas or near Texas. So slavery continued pretty much unabated throughout the war until the time the federal troops arrived and actually announced the end of the war and the freeing of the enslaved people. So when you think about that that delay and that timing, why it is important to, it was at least important to my family, was to kind of understand the cruelty of one group, the deliberate and intentional deception of one group over another for that extended period of time. In addition, so that's probably the first thing that I think of when I think of Juneteenth. I think the second thing is maybe a little bit less substantive, but as a person from Texas and thinking about the fact that most Americans had never heard of Juneteenth until 2020 in a time of extensive political, economic, social, racial unrest is, I don't know if the right word is surprising or just kind of being bemused by the fact that such a significant historical moment in the lives of African Americans would be virtually unknown in this country. So that would be the second part of when I think about what the meaning is for me. And then third, one of kind of the last part of my thinking when I think of Juneteenth is that when Juneteenth was first observed, it was actually a very somber occasion. People went to church, they had religious services, and probably the only part of the commemoration that was less sober was the fact that people would wear new clothes to symbolize a new beginning. There are lots of symbols around Juneteenth. There are the Juneteenth colors of red, black, yellow, and green. Red for the blood that was shed by people, black for the people themselves, green for Mother Earth, and then interestingly, yellow, which alternately is sometimes characterized as a color of hope or a color of deceit. They're also in Juneteenth now, over time, as the event has become more celebratory. People also have picnics and they have speeches, Miss Juneteenth pageants. And as I just mentioned, there's this emphasis on the colors and the kind of flag and symbols of Juneteenth. But to me, I guess to sum all of that up, I would say that the greatest meaning to me in terms of Juneteenth is really the celebration or the acknowledgement of the contributions both to culture and the achievements of African Americans in this country and around the world.
That Almeta. So let me ask you this. So given the historical significance of Juneteenth to Black Texans, why do you think the idea of a national holiday was not universally embraced until now?
I actually don't know the answer to that question. What I can tell you is that Juneteenth was officially recognized as a state holiday in Texas in 1980. And as of 2020, and I was not able to find any more recent information, there were 3 states that had no recognition, no formal recognition of Juneteenth. North Dakota, South Dakota, and Hawaii. And even in North Dakota, the governor did declare some sort of Juneteenth celebration day. So it's kind of hard to know, again, when you think about the significance and the association of the day with freedom and liberty, and those being so closely associated with the founding principles of our country, it is surprising that there would be resistance to Juneteenth.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Almeta. So in your opinion, why is it important to continue the traditions and celebrations of Juneteenth? You gave us a really great in-depth background about it, but why is it important to continue to talk about it, to celebrate it, to be happy about it? What do you think about that?
Well, I think the significance and the reason that it should be continue to be recognized is because, and it's a bit of a cliche, but if you don't know your history and understand your history, you could be doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. And also, I think that when we talk about Juneteenth, the facts and the history surrounding it, I think it gives us to have a discussion and an exchange to help all of us in the United States and around the world to really think about the opportunities to change that history of racial inequality and to think more, to try to embrace the principles of freedom and justice for everyone.
Thank you so much, Almeta. You have really started this conversation quite well. So thank you again for giving us the history, why it's important to you, and why everyone should care about it. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much. So I want to transition to focus on a community that has understood the importance of Juneteenth and encourages their community to express themselves as people worthy of the joy of liberation. And this year, Juneteenth takes on a whole new meaning as they look closely at their history while taking hold of a freer future for Black lives. So in the early 1900s, the residents of the Greenwood district in Tulsa, Oklahoma had built a self-sustaining community that supported hundreds of Black-owned businesses known as Black Wall Street. And so this summer, right now, this month, marks the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. Now, it's been described as the single worst incident of racial violence in American history. So Heather, can you briefly explain the Tulsa Massacre and why the 100th anniversary is commemorated?
Yes, well, thank you, Tonya, for first hosting this conversation and talking about something that is so important for us to acknowledge in our history, in our American history, and particularly the references to Juneteenth and why it's so important. I can't think of another example than the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, to signify why we must not only recall and recount our history, but learn from it, and showing what happens when we don't do that. So in 1921, the Greenwood district was a exciting, budding, very vibrant community in Tulsa, Oklahoma. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, but it was not the only one. There were a number of Black communities throughout Oklahoma that showed how Black independence really could survive and thrive as people were making their way out west and building community wealth and health in the way that they best knew how. And that's exactly what Tulsa, Oklahoma exemplified. But on May 30th, there was an altercation between Mr. Dick Rowland and I believe it's a Sarah Page or Sarah Wright. I'm going to get the name right, correct for you. But Mr. Dick Rowland was a shoe timer. And he was entering into a building in Tulsa and got on an elevator, and as the story goes, tripped and tore the dress, or in some way came in contact with Sarah. And Dick Rowland was a Black man and Sarah was a white woman. According to accounts, she screamed. She said that her dress was torn. He ran out of the elevator. And as a result, the white community sought for his arrest. What was interesting, though, was that the Black community came to defend him. And this was sort of really a lot of embers in this community, both Black and white, coming to a head, because there were definitely white people within the Tulsa, Oklahoma area that felt a little disgruntled at how well the Greenwood District had begun to really thrive. And so there were there was a strong contingent of white people who came to their court, came to the jail where Dick Rowland was held. And then there were Black people who came as well, armed to protect Dick Rowland. Shots were fired, and as a result, there was a mass, complete obliteration of the Greenwood District by white citizens of Tulsa, Oklahoma. It lasted for 2 days. It was on June 1st and 2nd that we saw one of the first domestic aerial attacks for a neighborhood. Americans actually bombing other Americans. And if you've seen the photos, it's devastating just to see how an entire neighborhood was completely burned to the ground. Over 300 lives lost. And this day, they are still uncovering mass graves where they believe that people were buried. Why is this important? It's important because when we think about Juneteenth and the amount of time that it took for enslaved Africans in Texas to receive word that they were free, and that process of not telling the story, not telling them, and the celebration that comes as a result of it, it is totally, totally indicative of what we saw happen in Greenwood. Because since 1921, the story was never really told. It's 100 years later, and we're just now beginning to really understand the breadth and scope of what happened in this community. Fortunately, there are some survivors. In fact, they testified before Congress this year, and President Biden, when he visited the Tulsa, Oklahoma Greenwood District, had an opportunity to sit down and speak with them. They're 106 and 107 years old. Wow, the resiliency of Black people, not only to still be here, but to be able to tell the story with such fervor and such emotion that make us understand why we absolutely must continue to recount our history and to recount the tragedies that have taken place, so that we don't make those same mistakes again. Now, I will tell you, Tonya, we were fortunate enough this year. My husband and I took our children to Tulsa so that they could experience firsthand this history, know the place of the Greenwood District, and physically put their hands, their feet onto the same ground that our people really worked to instill. And it was a very, very moving experience and trip, and I encourage everyone to take it. We learned a lot.
Thank you, Heather. And so, you know what, you kind of started my next question for you. I was going to say, you know, I understand that you recently spent some time in Tulsa. Is there something else that you can tell us that you took away from that experience? What is your perception of the community today?
You know, Tonya, I was standing on, I was standing in Black Wall Street in Greenwood District, and on one hand, I was so excited to be there with my kids, with my husband, and us having this time to experience the community. We went to Wanda J's to eat, so that we were eating right there on the street in one of the businesses to support Black business. So we had collard greens and fish, and my son had a great time with some Kool-Aid. We just, and it was down home folks. It was what we really respected and appreciated about the people who were building and restoring. We had a wonderful time going to some of the shops. In fact, we learned some stories. It's interesting what you hear when you get on the ground, because there were some people who believe to this day that that interaction between Dick Rowland and Sarah Page was because they had a relationship. That's the kind of stuff you get, the juicy stuff when you go to the community. And so they said, they had a relationship. There's a reason why so many people showed up to defend him, because they knew her. They knew what was going on. There's a reason why she didn't press charges. So, I loved leaving with that, sort of juicy tidbit gossip that you only get from people who were there on the ground. And my kids absolutely adored it. But I also saw, how this community that was not only destroyed, the health and wealth and the legacy of the community that was destroyed because of racism, it continued. It did not miss me that one side of the community had a barrier of railroad tracks, and the other side of the community had a major interstate highway going right through the community. I mean, splitting it in two. So this community that was so vibrant is literally living under a cloud of transportation pollution and railway toxins that go straight through it. It shows how we are continuing to inundate Black communities with pollution. Now, I have hope, because the American Jobs Plan that has been proposed by the Biden administration provides us with opportunities where up to 40% of the funding and infrastructure dollars that are proposed would be spent in marginalized Black and brown communities just like the Greenwood district. So there are certainly some really great opportunities to start to reverse some of the systemic and historic racism that has taken place and affected places like Greenwood, and put us in this situation of being and living under pollution constantly through the American Jobs Plan. I am very hopeful that we take advantage of this. I want to see American Jobs Plan funding go to really help rebuild and create wealth for the people who are legacy there. Let's not forget, there have been no reparations to any of those families that were part of that terrible massacre that took place. And there should be some compensation to those families, but at the same time, legacy building and opportunities that we can use right now through the American Jobs Plan to create healthy, pollution-free, clean energy spaces, and at the same time create wealth in these communities. I have hope, and that's what I left with, along with some really nice artwork that came out of the Greenwood district. We invested in Black business while we were there, but I certainly left with a lot of hope.
I most certainly was going to ask you if there were some pieces of art or something that came out of that trip, because I know you. I know that you will invest, and I know that you will invest well. And I appreciate you also for mentioning the American Jobs Plan. I just wanted to get your perception on, does this plan relate to modern day Tulsa? And it absolutely does. And so thank you for sharing about that. And I know that we might lose you on the call today, but is there anything else that you would like to share about that experience, about what Juneteenth means to you? Anything else you want to share with us?
Tonya, last thing I'll say on this, and I want people to really take this to heart. We talk about legislation and ways that we can have impacts on climate and environment, and what can we do to reverse. There is something right now that, in my humble opinion, is the most important piece of legislation when it comes to climate action. And it's the For the People Act. It's making sure that we have the right to vote. the people who lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma during that time of the massacre not only were robbed of their wealth, their generational wealth, of their lives, they were robbed of the access to provide input to the future of their communities through those rights, through the right to vote. And until we really get equity across the country and everybody has true access to voting, that's the only way we can assure we're going to be able to implement climate policy. And let me explain why. Study after study after study has shown that Black and brown people are more likely to vote for climate policies that are protective of our environment and our people than anybody else. That particular demographic is the one that we can count on to go and support sound climate policy that not only protects our families, but also protects our planet and provides jobs and provides equity and access. But this is the same group of people that is targeted in state legislatures, through state legislatures across this country, to keep them from voting. So right now, if I were to give any takeaway for our listening audience, in celebration of Juneteenth, register to vote, register 5 people to vote, send a text, email, tweet, Facebook message to your senators or members of your state legislature demanding that everyone have access to voting. Send a note to your senators and to your members of Congress to tell them that if we're going to have climate policy, if we're going to truly protect our communities from climate change, we absolutely must, without a shadow of a doubt, have access to voting and should not be suppressed or hindered in any way. That is my takeaway that I need everybody to do. And I think if we do that, not only are we on a path of securing good climate solutions, but really being able to implement the American Jobs Plan and see and realize healthy and wealthy communities all across this country. And I can't wait.
Thank you, Heather. I appreciate that. Appreciate you for sharing with us today. And, you know, you really set up this transition to the next conversation quite well, because I want to talk about equity and access. I want to talk about how we understand the power in communities coming together, but what happens when they don't have an official seat at the table? You know, so as you mentioned, you know, while all people living in the United States are affected by climate change, some communities and some populations are more vulnerable to changing climate conditions than others. And communities of color and low-income communities are hit first and worst by climate change and air and water pollution. And all communities should have ready access to accurate information and a meaningful voice in the development process of improving our communities. Like, what does that mean when you're not talking to the people experiencing that in the community? And so I now want to focus the shift in the focus of today's conversation to engaging low-income communities, communities of color, and others who have not always had a seat at the table. So Ms. Hermina, I'm so excited that she's a part of this conversation today. So Hermina, to give people an idea of the part of Georgia where you live and work, can you describe what the climate change issues are on the coastline of Georgia?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for that important question, Tonya. Here on the coast, currently we're in hurricane season, but here on the coast, we experience the effects and consequences of global climate change, global warming year round. Many of our communities are in flood zones. So there's certainly sea level rise, there's increasing temperature, there's erosion, shoreline erosion. And we see it in many communities from Savannah all the way down to the Georgia-Florida line in Camden County.
So, Hermina, what's the variation of the population's lifestyle where you are? What do you see, how people live, what they experience? What does that variation look like?
Well, there is a range of variations. Here on the coast, we have folks from all walks of life, a diverse population of people. However, the predominant population here on the coast is the Gullah Geechee people, who have been here for more than 300 years. They are the population, and I include myself as an African American in that population, living here on the coast, experience firsthand these extreme weather phenomenon. So these are the frontline communities. I call them the sacrifice zones, in which brown and black people disproportionately experience climate change and the other issues, flooding, whether it's flooding of private property, flooding on the coast. If they are fishermen and there's flooding, it impacts the community culturally, it impacts the community economically, and of course it impacts the communities socially. So we have these gated communities down here on the coast. And if you live in a certain zip code, you can afford to escape climate change. You can afford to escape flooding. And then there are others who are the elderly, who are children, who are women, and who are the yet to be unborn, who are being impacted by the environmental injustices, whether it's environmental pollution. There's a lot of wood pulp plants and industries here on the coast that are the primary contributors to air pollution here on the coast. And so it ranges as far as who the people are, it ranges, but most importantly, because we know better, we have to do better. And it's organizations like Mom Clean Air Force and GIPL and the Glenn County Environmental Coalition and the Climate Reality Project who are responding to these issues of environmental, let's just call it what it is, environmental racism, also known as environmental justice, as well as climate justice.
For that, Hermina. I want to, if you can quickly tell us, I want to know, what do you do at the Georgia Interfaith Power and Light?
So, of course, Georgia Interfaith Power and Light is a faith-based organization. We act on behalf of creation, care, stewardship, as a part of our faith and as a response to our faith. We put our efforts into lessening environmental degradation, of resource depletion, as well as environmental justice affecting people, which separates us. We feel that we are all connected in this really deep, existential and spiritual way, and that we are beholden and responsible to our siblings, no matter their background, their race, their creed, sexual orientation. We are called to be responsible for our sisters and brothers and to speak on behalf of our sisters and brothers who are experiencing environmental injustice throughout the state of Georgia.
I set that up because I love this concept that you have on how to make climate change accessible in people's daily lives. How do you make climate change make sense for people who sometimes aren't used to having the conversation about climate? They know that, there are climate issues, but they might not know the exact words of how to express themselves, how to protect themselves, how to express what's going on. What are those concepts and how do you make them make sense for people?
So there are two groups of people, I believe, and that when it comes to climate change conversations, there are the climate informed, and then there are the climate impacted. And so, you can be in both, but the climate informed is like we're preaching to the choir. They already know about how to mitigate climate change, how to adapt, how to implement resiliency plans and disaster preparedness plans. These are the informed folks. But the climate impacted are challenged in many ways. And many of those communities are communities of color. They're Black and brown communities here on the coast who, in a gut level, in their craw, they know what climate change is because it's experiential. It's a practical experience that they live through every day. It's their lived experience. But when it comes to those of us who are climate informed, and we are bringing our, we're bringing our climatees, our mother, our climate language to these populations, I think that it would behoove us to really concentrate on how we relay and communicate these issues to diverse communities, and certainly the communities that are climate impacted. Myself, as an oral historian, I approach communities, particularly Gullah Geechee communities, from where people are, where they are, in our own colloquial language, if you will. Sometimes I don't let my verbs agree with my nouns, and so you might discuss with a senior group. I've shared this with you in Almeta before, that you might be giving a presentation to a senior group who's mostly Gullah Geechee, Black folks. And you meet them where they are in a language that they understand. And I have learned from them, as in expressing to them what climate change is from this, macro perspective, these folks break it down for me. Oh, you mean like when it's getting too hot down here and it's hotter this year than it was the year before? Oh, that's what you're talking about. Yeah, it's like 10 degrees hotter than it was 10 years ago. That's climate change. They're not saying it like, the temperature of the earth has increased by point so and so degrees, and therefore the polar ice caps are melting and the sea level is rising, it's warmer. All they know is the fish ain't jumping, it's hot. What we gonna do about it? So you meet people where they are. Madam, sir, ma'am, what we're gonna do is Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, along with other organizations working here on the coast, we are going to share your experiences with our elected officials, with our senators. We're going to start a campaign. Senator Raphael Warnock is Gullah Geechee. He's from Savannah. So, sir, we're going to start a campaign. We're going to work with this community and ensuring that your voice is heard. Your voice is heard. One voice, one vote at a time. And so those are the just simple ways that we engage, that I personally engage with African-American Gullah Geechee communities here on the coast.
Thank you, Hermina. I know about when the fish ain't jumping. I know all about that.
Oh, yes. Especially in the summertime. It's time for the fish to be jumping. I appreciate that because
yes. Yeah. Again, you have to meet people where they are. Like, they know that there are climate change issues and concerns, and but sometimes they just don't know how to talk about it. They know that their concerns should be addressed and talked about, but how do you do that? And one of the questions I want to ask you: what do you consider the most effective way for our Black, Brown, BIPOC to participate in environmental policy making decisions? What is that best way?
I'm going to share a quote by Dr. John Henrik Clarke, the father of African world history. And he said, "History is a clock that people use to tell their political time of day. It is a compass they use to find themselves on the map of human geography. History tells the people where they are, but more importantly, it tells them what they must be. What we must be is our brother and our sister's keeper. I believe Heather said that before. We must be our brothers and our sisters' keepers. We must be the voice that many of them sometimes don't feel that they have. We have a moral and ethical obligation and responsibility to act on behalf of our sisters and brothers. And so, on behalf of all of our sisters and brothers, but more importantly, those who are disadvantaged, disenfranchised, and need our help the most. So what I do on the coast is simply, contact faith communities, leaders of faith communities. The Black Church is a premier institution in Black communities, and it is through connecting with just regular folks that I learned what their issues are, and we translate those into how do we respond to it by policy, through policy.
Thank you so much, Hermina. I appreciate you talking about acting on behalf of, because again, there are times that we don't have a seat at the table, and we want someone to act on our behalf. So thank you for breaking that down. Is there something else that you were going to say?
Yeah. I was going to say, those of us who are in the Black church, not church, the Black church. There is a song that says, I'm gonna sit at the welcome table. I'm gonna sit at the welcome table today. The song actually says, one of these days. Mm-hmm. The fierce urgency of now is that it's not going to be one of these days. We're going to have to demand that we are at the table, that we are included in the conversations at those policymaking tables where our issues and our concerns are heard. And if they are not heard, we will go to the voting booth and the ballot box, and we will make sure that we are heard in the loudest way. Mm-hmm. And so we are demanding a seat at the table. We're not asking for a seat at the table.
That's right.
We're so appreciative of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We are most appreciative of those giants on whose shoulders we stand. But today we are saying we're demanding a seat at the table. We deserve a seat at the table.
I'm about to pass a collection plate.
Girl.
After your conversation. I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Hermina. That seat at the table is now. And, it's you've transitioned so well into this next conversation, because it's nowhere is it more evident how the lack of the seat at the table has impacted the delivery of healthcare to moms, pregnant women, specifically Black women, to the extent that it has become a Black maternal health crisis. So given the remarkable advancements we have made across nearly every aspect of healthcare in the last quarter century, it's very shocking that women in the US are more likely to suffer a pregnancy-related death today than in the 1990s. The danger is even greater for women of color. Black women are at least 3 times more likely than white women to die as a result of pregnancy. At 17.4 deaths per 100,000 live births, our nation suffers from a higher rate of maternal mortality than any other developed country. That gap is immense. Our rate of maternal death is more than twice as high as it is in nations of comparable wealth. Just think about that. And so what is even more disturbing is that, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, nearly 60,000 of these deaths are preventable. So I want to discuss how we can end racial disparities by naming and addressing factors that contribute to systemic racism as a necessary step to combat the Black maternal health crisis. So I am introducing Ms. Kelly Presley. Welcome, Kelly, to the conversation. So Kelly, why are Black women at a higher risk for pregnancy complications?
And say it in so many different ways. It's not seen as a social issue enough. Not enough of the right people are hearing our cry. And that's one reason why I'm excited about Juneteenth, because that is a time for everybody to celebrate, for the mere fact that when our women, our ancestors, our foremothers were taken away into these other environments, into these white folks' homes, they took our midwives. Our midwives practiced giving birth to their babies. It was a birthright that was given to us, birthright that was practiced by us, that was practiced in other communities, and as the primary health care system that we knew, that we mastered, and that we just perfected, we also lost that craft over time. So once we were told, look, y'all don't have to do this for free anymore. Y'all can go back home to y'all families. Y'all can go back and nurture y'all families and grow y'all communities. It already started to dwindle by then. So I think that's one of the main reasons that we are losing our babies, and we are losing our moms, and we are so much at a disadvantage right now in the U.S. But everything you've said is correct. You know, our numbers are incredibly low to say that we are America. You know, a lot of the things that could have been prevented, miscarriage, stillborn babies, preterm deaths, infant deaths, a lot of stuff dealing with the climate, a lot of stuff dealing with education, a lot of stuff dealing with support of the community and just education. So great points that I'm hearing so far, and I'm just sitting here, I should be taking notes, because it was just so many great points to hit on, and I'm like, oh my Lord, there's so much to say. But I'm gonna let it go back to you, Doctor, because I have so much feedback, so I'm gonna let you go back so I can answer them with more of a streamline. So that's what I have to say. I mean, it's a crazy disparity to say that we are in America, but like I said before, I think it has a lot to do with a lost craft that was given by and just taken away because we focused on another community. And just when we got the freedom, you know, by that point, you know, we've been separated from the practice. We've been separated, and we're trying to get it back now. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, Kelly, you know, we'll continue these conversations afterwards. So take notes, but continue the conversation. So, you know, we'll be around.
I'm here.
In your opinion, what do you think can be done about Black maternal mortality rates? What can we do? What are we supposed to be doing?
Well, what can we do, and what we supposed to be doing? It definitely has to be seen as an emergency social issue, definitely be taken serious by enough of the right people. We have to get more people educated about what's going on and about what can be done, and just the simple fact that a lot of the deaths can be prevented, and definitely work together in a holistic way with schools, with the community, with community organizations, with the elected officials, a lot of environmental organizations that would actually acknowledge, educate, and integrate different ways of tackling these problems with simple things as far as, look, you know, before our people could have babies in the fields and go back to work the next day, but because it's harder and the fish are not jumping and all these other things are not happening, we have to take a step back and, you know, be more comfortable so we won't go into early labor with the baby, so that, you know, I know you're hungry, but you can't just jump and take any fish that's jumping out because of the mercury level. So there's so much information that we are not aware of, that the information has changed over the years. The information has changed over decades, that education and teamwork could change it so significantly. But it does have to take on a holistic approach. It has to be addressed. It has to be called and identified as a systematic problem.
Thank you. That's very, very true. You know, we've seen the stories in the news about our Black and brown women losing their lives after birth, or even sometimes while they're pregnant. And, you know, me personally, I've had friends to tell me, you know, I've gone to the doctor, I expressed to them how I was feeling, and it's like, oh, that's normal, just go home. I mean, for someone like Serena Williams, we saw what happened to her. She was like, I'm listening to my body. There is something wrong. There is something wrong. You know, do something about it. I'm not just going to let you just kind of like shoo me off. Shoo, shoo, that's normal. You know, how can pregnant Black and brown women advocate for themselves during their pregnancy? You know,
Great
after they've
question.
given birth, how can we advocate for ourselves?
It's basically getting educated to ask these questions. And I can't speak higher about doulas and midwives. You know, we're midwives, which I am. I've been a midwife since 2010. I'm a mother of 9, and I have not always had the birthing experience, but I studied under granny midwives, and I've studied under a community of amazing and beautiful women and community advocates and people and organizations that are passionate about birth, passionate about people, passionate about healthy lives. So they have all influenced me. Fortunately, I had already had birth by all my babies by then, but it encouraged me to share with other people. So it was more of a each one, teach one. And I think if we go into situations where we are intentional about creating opportunities, job assistance, transportation, prenatal care visits, doulas being equipped with training that they can afford to be someone to give back to the community, doctors' offices that include advocacy for making sure these Black moms know what options are available, because if you don't know what is available, you're not going to know what your options are. I think when the conversation includes, you know, you can do this, you don't have to stay at this doctor's office, or you know that if you need an air conditioner or if you need a certain diet, you can go to this person, or you can go to this community resource. I think it's about making sure that the moms and the women and the dads, I think getting the dads involved, because the dads, I think, and it is almost Father's Day. It's amazing how many more fathers are getting involved with their pregnant women. I think make sure they know how to advocate for their pregnant woman is a remarkable step as well. So I think it goes back to being inclusive, being intentional, being just being very assertive about creating opportunities to educate the moms, getting the churches involved. Some people don't go to church, but they do have mom organizations. They do have mom groups, Moms Clean Air. I mean, Moms Clean Air. So it's so many different organizations and different ways of getting the message out that you have options. This is what you can do. This is what you need to look out for if something should happen, and just making sure that all these systems are working together cohesively to create a better outcome for the moms. Because like I said earlier, a lot of the things that are happening to our sisters in birth can be prevented. It can be prevented with conversation and specific and intentional systems in place.
Amen. And you talked about,
we don't have to wait for someone to tell you. You know, and what I have noticed that a lot of they do think we're strong. They think we're Trojan horse. They think we don't feel pain. You know, me sometimes as a mom, I ignore little things that may be going on with me only because I can't slow down. I can't afford to slow down. Mm-hmm. You know, I can't take the time off. I can't take the time away from the other, obligations I have because of the fear of loss, the fear of being set back. But I think when it all boils down to, we have to understand that we are an important element to the community. We are an important element to our family. We are worth the time. We are worth the pause. We are worth saying, look, something's not right. It's just not Serena Williams or Brandy or whoever that's going through these things. We are worth the time and the effort to say, we need to fix this. We are part of the community, and our presence alone validates us needing that extra attention. And this is what I need from you.
Absolutely. So understanding what's going on with your body, what are the warning signs and symptoms of a medical emergency during pregnancy?
Oh, that's a great question, because there's so many of them. I know we get confused a lot. We see a little blood in our undies. We're like, okay, something's wrong. Something could be wrong. That doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong, but if you see a lot of blood, you need to start getting to your healthcare professional contact and making a phone call or just getting up. Blurred vision. Sometimes things just start moving on your paper and people start getting two heads. Something wrong. Let's go to your emergency team. Unusual back pain, headaches. Sometimes you have a very distinctive smell coming from your underwear. There's a whole list of things. Anything that's not the norm. The baby stop moving when you do your count. There's a list of things. And I think when something out the norm happens, that's when you call somebody. You don't just stick it through and wait. Even if you call in, we do say lay on your left side, drink something warm, take a warm bath. There are some things that a warm bath and a cup of warm tea just won't fix. We're gonna have to get that home birth started, or get you to the birthing center, or take you to the hospital, whatever your birth plan entails. But swelling of the legs, that comes postpartum. But the bleeding, blurry vision, unusual stomach pain, headaches, those are primarily reasons to start heading to or contacting your healthcare provider, your OBGYN, your midwife, your birthing team.
Thank you for that. So, in talking about understanding signs and symptoms, what about same question, warning signs and symptoms of an emergency after you've given birth? What does that look like?
Okay, so after, let me transition my brain to postpartum, because I do train with postpartum as well. There are things that can happen right after birth, and if you don't have an eye for it, you really just think that's just part of the recovery, which sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't, because you could have fevers and chills when you are in labor, and you can have them again in postpartum. You can have convulsions in labor, which is not good either. Convulsions, dizziness, a lot of things that happen when you're pregnant can happen in postpartum, and neither of them are well. I should have just said all that. But things to look for that may continue after you deliver could be the same thing. So it can be the edema, which is swelling of the limbs. It can be chest pains. It can be stomach pains, your lower stomach hurting. It could be dizziness. It could be depression, severe depression. It could be bleeding. Some of the exact same things that brought you in the hospital. Those are some things that could suggest preeclampsia. It could suggest major depression. It can suggest postpartum hemorrhage, which is not good at all either as well. It can suggest deep vein thrombosis, which is not good either. So it's basically knowing what to look for, and again, speaking up for yourself, because if you need something to be done, I wouldn't wait. I suggest you wait till you go home and you get comfortable and there's no one there to help you, and you go through some things that you should have taken care of beforehand, and you leave and things may not end up as well. But that is where your community comes in. That's the benefit of having a doula and a community of loved ones to look out for you. And that's something else I cover as well. But you definitely benefit from having a community. And that was the benefit of the midwife again. That was the benefit of being in a community that is accountable for each other.
Yes.
There was always somebody there to make sure you get through that time frame, making sure that your diet is still good and you're still protected from other parts of the elements, and the healing process of getting back to your healthy self, which is definitely a part of pregnancy. It's all connected.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kelly. And as someone who has been a volunteer for Moms Clean Air Force, you understand the impacts of climate. So we appreciate you for being on board and still just, supporting us and being around and being a voice. There is a connection between climate and pregnancy. How does climate change affect Black maternal health?
Oh, okay. Well, there's quite a few reports that are out, and living in I'm a Southern girl. I like to call myself a grit. That is a girl raised in the South. So I've seen, and it doesn't really have to be in the South, because I think there are areas in every city that doesn't have a lot of trees, doesn't have a lot of shade trees, that are located by toxic plants like not even water plants, but just places that do a lot of toxic processing and whatnot. Those are the places where lower income moms may be located, and it's more toxic for them to live there. That kind of stuff causes problems in their pregnancy, and that's where a lot of people in Black communities are faced with air pollution. And some reports I've read is like 1.54 times higher than the average American population. That is the kind of things that we are exposed to. And you're looking at birth defects, you're looking at early labor, you're looking at just the results of the lack of greenery. They actually have a name for it. They call them, actually wrote it down, heat islands. Yeah, heat islands. That's when you have the black pavement, no trees, so you're sucking up all the toxins in your system, in which you're sucking up, your baby's also sucking up. So, everything is connected, everything is relevant, but it definitely has an effect on the unborn baby being in these toxic environments. They're these high climated environments. And when you don't see the fish jumping out the water, you're definitely going in a space where it's too hot. And I know my husband like to tease me a lot. He said, "You're such an air-conditioned baby." I'm like, no, I don't want to have no heat stroke out here. I can't take the heat. So if you're hot, and you're like, oh Lord, you having some issues. And I know with one of my babies, I started leaking because I got too hot. So if I'm leaking and I'm not knowing what's going on, and because I took the initiative to actually go to my care team, and they're like, okay, your amniotic fluids are getting lower. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm drinking my water. I'm running and, doing errands because I have other kids and I have other things I need to do. I didn't understand what it was, but it was because I was still dehydrated. I'm drinking for 2 now. So when you're dealing with the climate, I'm in air conditioner, but I'm also raking and running, and I'm out and about in the community. I'm still overheated. That's a climate thing. So again, everything is relative. You really have to be cautious of where you're going, and just be mindful of things like preterm labor and heat strokes and everything else, because it is life-threatening. And for moms that have high blood pressure and diabetes, preeclampsia is a bigger issue. It could happen.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. I appreciate that. I'm sure this conversation will be continued. I appreciate you for kind of bringing it full circle when we were, talking about the connection of climate and pregnancy. So I just really appreciate that connection and that conversation. I know that we are coming to an end. I want to know, Hermina, is there anything that you would like to leave with our listening audience today, as we are talking about Juneteenth, celebrating Juneteenth, these conversations about having a seat at the table? Is there anything that you'd like to share with us before we close our time?
Yes, I'd like to say that we are resilient. We are resilient people. And if anybody is, it's Black folks. I would encourage us to get involved with organization like Moms Clean Air Force, and learn more and become an advocate for your community. And we understand that freedom has not been free. And we today take so much for granted. But today, let's unite with our voices and our vote to effect change in our local communities.
Thank you, Hermina. Anything you would like to share, Kelly, as we close our time together?
Well, as a birth worker and someone that definitely knows about the effects of climate change and the importance of having the freedom that we have today, I think any pregnant mom would definitely take advantage of her birthright, and that is speaking up for herself and creating her birth team that is looking out for her best interests and being a part of a community that provides the care for other moms. Maybe going back and getting the education from organizations like Moms Clean Air, from her community, from local officials, because their information is out there, support is out there, and advocacy is out there, and just taking the initiative to do what's in the best interest and feeling her body, feeling her voice, and letting herself be heard for herself and for her baby, because we're worth it. Our babies are worth it.
That's right. Thank you so much. I just appreciate this time that we've had today. And to our listening audience, we know that there has been a breadth of information included in our conversation today. I know that it's been informative. It's probably also been a bit overwhelming. And you're probably wondering, how can I help? How can I get plugged in? What are the next steps? Hermina already mentioned it. I would say, get involved in the climate action space. You can start with Moms Clean Air Force, Sierra Club, Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. Speak out about these injustices that you're seeing. They exist. Speak out about them and show up where you can to be a voice for others. I would say to also respond when you're called upon. There's so many call to actions that are out there right now. So respond, get involved. And, you can support legislation that we support here in Moms Clean Air Force, Black Maternal Health, Clean Future Act, Clean School Bus Act, Environmental Justice for All, and that's just to name a few. You can find us at Moms Clean Air Force online, www.momscleanairforce.org. Sierra Club Georgia at www.sierraclub.org/Georgia, and Georgia Interfaith Power and Light at www.gipl.org. I want to say thank you again for our amazing panelists. Thank you for your time today. I know that these are not, these are just the beginnings of our conversations together and our relationships together. And I know that there's so much more that we're going to be doing in our communities with one another. So thank you for your time today. Thank you to our listening audience, and happy Juneteenth.